ask unanimous consent to the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that I be recognized to speak as of in morning business.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I awoke on Sunday morning early to two familiar news in Florida that 3 boaters had lost their lives in an accident. And at the time, their names were not known. This is unfortunate. It happens quite often, especially at night and during this time of year. A couple hours later, as I was driving to church with my family early that morning, I got a text that I didn't get to look at until we had parked. And it basically said that José Fernández, the all-star pitcher from the Miami Marlins, had lost his life in a boating accident. And immediately I was able to connect the two events and realize that the 3 boaters who had lost their life, one of them was José Fernández and his 2 friends, Emilio Macias and Eduardo Rivero. His death at just 24 years of age has obviously devastated his family. But it's also had an extraordinary impact on our community. It's shaken, obviously, the Miami Marlins, their organization, and its fans. It's rocked Tampa, Florida, where he played high school, and South Florida communities where he lived and where he was just starting to make his mark. And it's had a deep impact on immigrant communities, and especially the Cuban exile community in South Florida, and of course the entire baseball world and the sporting world. His talents were unquestionable, but he had only a brief but shining career in Major League Baseball. He had played for a year. The last 2 years had been injured, had come back and had even a better year than in 2013 when he was Rookie of the Year. He was obviously a young man who was headed to a distinguished career that I believe would have led to the Hall of Fame and perhaps along the way a couple of pennants. But it's interesting that his impact goes well beyond that you would think of a star baseball player. And you ask yourself, why did this young man who had been with us for just such a brief moment lead to such an outpouring of grief from a community? Its impact, I mean, anywhere you go in Miami of the last 48 hours, it's all anyone can talk about. To understand it, you have to understand his story. I never met José Fernández, and yet I feel like if I knew him. And that's how millions of people feel. They never met him, but they feel like they know him. They feel like they know him because his story, his family, his passion, it is at the end our story as Cuban Americans, as Americans. By now, most of the nation has seen tributes to José. They've seen commemorations show footage of what he accomplished on the field and the way most baseball fans knew him as José Fernández, the dominant baseball player, the Tampa Alonzo High School phenomenon who led them to 2 state titles, the first-round draft choice, the Rookie of the Year, the 2-time All-Star. As a baseball player, quite frankly, there were few better than José Fernández. But off the field, as a human being, as a son, a grandson, a teammate, a neighbor, I believe he was even better from everything we know. He was born in Santa Clara, Cuba, in a place where tree branches and rocks are what passes for Louisville Sluggers and Rawlings balls. He was drawn to the national sport of Cuba. He would spend countless hours swinging branches at rocks he had collected, dreaming of the day his talents could and would take him somewhere else. Thanks to sacrifices by his mother, who would take him to the ballpark so he could play youth baseball, he started to demonstrate a special talent at a young age. And by the time he was a teenager, like more than 1 million Cubans during the past 50 years, José faced a difficult choice. His stepfather, a baseball player in his own right, had defected after 13 attempts and had made a life for himself in Tampa. Now, José could stay in Cuba, a place that to this day is still ruled by a despotic regime where your talent and your work can only take you as far as unelected dictators say you can go, or he could risk it all for the chance at freedom. And he risked it, not once, but on 4 separate occasions. So desperate was he to leave that island that he took his chances crossing the Florida Straits on boats that probably had no business being more than a few miles offshore. 3 times he tried and 3 times he failed. After his 3rd attempt, the Cuban government put him in prison for 2 months. He was 14 years of age at the time, and he was placed in a prison and in a cell with hardened criminals, murderers, a boy among the worst. Then came a 4th try, but instead of a short and treacherous journey to Miami, they chose a longer and more dangerous journey to Mexico. At one point during that 4th journey, on a boat being tossed by crashing waves and high seas, he heard a splash. And he saw someone in the water thrashing about 60 feet away from the boat. He didn't know who it was, and without thinking, he jumped in to save that person. It was once he got close to that person in the water that he realized the person who had fallen overboard was his mother. He recalled swimming towards her, watching her struggle in the rough seas. He finally reached her. He calmed her. He told her, "Grab my back, but don't push me down. Let's go slow and we'll make it." She held his left shoulder, and with his right arm, by the way his pitching arm, he paddled. He swam 15 minutes back to the boat in waves he later described as, quote, "stupid big," end quote, and he pulled himself and his mother to safety. José was 15 years old. Before America ever met José Fernandez, before his fastball earned him millions of dollars and countless fans, in the middle of the night, in rough seas and against all odds, at just 15 years of age, this young man that José Fernandez was revealing himself to be. But as he would later tell us, the hardest part of his life was still yet to come. For like so many immigrants, my parents included, his first years here were difficult. He struggled when he first arrived, feeling overwhelmed by his new surroundings and his new language. He was helpless and alone and missing his family, especially his grandmother, who he once called the love of my life. She's my everything. He said it was the toughest period of his young life, tougher even than the time he spent in a Cuban prison trying to defect. But he overcame, and eventually he came into his own. He was a star on the high school diamond in Tampa, and scouts back then took notice. Before the 2011 draft, Major League Baseball released their scouting report on him. He got high marks for his athletic abilities, but what set him apart was how he was rated when it came to his poise, instinct, and aggressiveness. The notes on the official scouting report read, "Exudes confidence, no fear approach." This was not cockiness or arrogance. It was the kind of peaceful self-assurance that comes from a kid who had known life and death, who had known freedom and captivity, and who had lived more life in 19 years than a kid his age should have to. He finally reached the major leagues with the Marlins, and right away you saw a young man blessed with Hall of Fame talent, a blue who played the game with energy and enthusiasm of a boy who understood and appreciated just how blessed he was. But one of José's proudest accomplishments, in fact, he said his proudest, was not on the diamond. And we know this because he told us. Last year, José became an American citizen. And afterwards, he said, "This one is my most important accomplishment. I am an American citizen now. I am one of them. I consider myself now to be free. I thank this amazing country for giving me the opportunity to go to school here and learn the language and pitch in the major leagues. It is an honor to be a part of this country, and I respect it so much." José knew. He knew how special and fortunate and blessed he was and we are. He knew how improbable his journey was, from the rocks and branches in Santa Clara to the brightest lights of the show, from a Cuban prison to a major league clubhouse, from living in a communist nightmare to living the American dream. And this is why José's death has hit so many so hard, because José's story was our story, because he reminds so many in my community of someone they know, of a brother or of a son, of a nephew. José represented not just all of us who were fortunate to live our own American dream, he represents countless others who never made it, the ones who lie in unmarked graves along the Florida Straits, who died in political prisons in Cuba, who sent their children to America hoping to join them later only to never see them again, who long ago gave up hope that life in Cuba could ever return to what it once was, but have found new hope and joy and gratitude in this, the greatest country the world has ever known. We loved him just a little more and took more pride in him than most, but José didn't just belong to Cuban Americans. A young man from Santa Clara, Cuba, playing America's pastime in a truly unique American city on a team with players from Taiwan and Venezuela and Japan and the Dominican Republic and Mobile, Alabama and Panorama, California. José Fernández was the pride of Miami, but he belonged to every fan who loved to watch him pitch. When Miami saw José on the mound, they saw more than just a great athlete. They saw all their hopes and dreams and aspirations, all we are and all we could be, and we said to ourselves, this is what the American dream looks like, and boy, is the American dream alive and well. This young man meant a lot to a lot of us for different reasons and in different ways, and now, Just as quickly as he came into our lives, just as he was coming into his own and really starting to fulfill his athletic potential, and just as we were really getting to know him, he is gone. In their moment of unimaginable grief, I want to thank his family for bringing him into this world, for raising him, despite difficult obstacles, to become the man he was, and for encouraging Josééé to never give up in the search for freedom, a freedom that eventually allowed him to share his many gifts with us on and off the field. José Fernández made Tampa's Alonzo High better. He made the Miami Marlins better. He made all of baseball better. He made Miami and Tampa better. In the way he lived his life, he reminded us of how blessed we are to live in this, the greatest nation on earth. My friends, that's not bad for a 24-year-old kid from Santa Clara, Cuba. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor and suggest